11. Teresa Giudice. In 2013, Real Housewives of New Jersey stars Teresa and Joe Giudice were indicted on federal fraud charges for a multitude of alleged crimes. The couple were accused of exaggerating their income on loan applications dating as far back as 2009, and of hiding assets throughout bankruptcy proceedings just a few years later. Additionally, Joe was accused of failing to file his taxes over a 4-year period from 2004 to 2008. The pair were convicted of mail, wire, and bankruptcy fraud charges. Joe was sentenced to 41 months in federal prison and was deported to Italy upon his release in 2019, despite having essentially spent his entire life in the United States. Meanwhile, Teresa served a 15-month sentence behind bars. Judge Esther Salas initially considered giving Teresa probation rather than ordering her to serve actual time behind bars. But she changed her mind when Teresa allegedly failed to fully disclose certain financial information to probation, leaving a $75,000 discrepancy that she was unable, or perhaps unwilling, to account for. Judge Esther Salas admonished Teresa for failing to cooperate with probation despite being a savvy businesswoman, which created more than a small amount of doubt over whether her failure to follow the rules was as unintentional as she claimed. Salas went on to tell Teresa that her failure to be fully transparent about her assets as required offended the court. Teresa and Joe divorced in 2020 due to the strain that their legal issues placed on their marriage. According to People magazine, Joe currently lives in the Bahamas, and he and Teresa have remained close ever since. Teresa reportedly hopes that Joe can eventually return to the United States, and she's known to become visibly emotional when asked about the situation during interviews. 10. Porsche Williams. In July 2020, 39-year-old Real Housewives of Atlanta star Porsche Williams was accused of participating in a violent protest against the police in Louisville, Kentucky, over the shooting death of Breonna Taylor. She was among 87 demonstrators, including several famous people, who were arrested during the event, which was held outside the home of the state's Attorney General, Daniel Cameron. Their main goal was to put pressure on Cameron to bring charges against the 3 officers involved in Taylor's death. But many of them ended up going to jail themselves instead. In a series of now-deleted social media posts, Williams admonished Cameron for upgrading the charges against her to a felony level, which meant that she could have faced up to 5 years in prison if convicted as charged. She was initially held with no bond, but was eventually released, and the felony case was dropped. Williams still faced misdemeanor counts of second-degree disorderly conduct and trespassing, but appears to have squared the matter away without facing any major consequences. 3 months later, in October 2020, Williams was arrested for getting into a fight with Real Housewives co-star Kenya Moore during the show's reunion taping. She turned herself in to the Fulton County Sheriff in Georgia and was booked and released on a misdemeanor battery charge. Footage from the taping showed Williams charging at Moore and pulling her hair. According to sources, the incident was over just as soon as it began, indicating that Williams most likely handled the matter without any jail time or other serious punishments. 9. Jules Weinstein. As the COVID-19 virus began to sink its claws into the planet in early 2020, Real Housewives of New York alum Julianne "Jules" Weinstein was arrested for allegedly attacking her estranged husband, investment banker Michael Weinstein, in front of their children. The pair had split in 2016 after 8 years of marriage and had been separated for about 4 years when the incident occurred in Palm Beach County, Florida. They split due to Michael's suspected cheating, which he has always adamantly denied. According to news reports, 39-year-old Julianne was booked into the local detention center and released shortly thereafter. One source told People magazine that Michael and Jules got into a verbal altercation in a parking lot while exchanging custody. Michael reportedly accused Jules of approaching his car with a baseball bat and using it to damage the rear of his vehicle. She also allegedly punched Michael in the face and licked his car window. The insider claimed that the incident was captured on video. Michael's lawyer, Morgan Richardson, told People that his client had obtained an order of protection, but offered few other details on the matter. In a statement, Richardson described the incident as an example of reflecting Ms. Weinstein's increasingly reckless behavior. Reflecting Ms. Weinstein's increasingly reckless behavior. He went on to say that protecting the children was Michael's priority. By the time the incident occurred, Jules had left Roni after being featured in the show's 8th season. Jules pleaded guilty to a battery charge and declined to release a statement to the media. This wasn't the first time law enforcement intervened during a disagreement. Earlier on in the Weinstein separation, the police had responded to their New York home, and at one point, Jules had obtained a temporary restraining order against Michael. In 2017, the pair became entangled in an acrimonious court battle over $135,000 in unpaid child support that Michael allegedly owed. Both parties accused one another of misusing funds that they believed should have been set aside for their kids. The former couple's divorce was finalized 8 months after the parking lot incident in October of 2020. 8. Dana Wilkey. As Real Housewives of New Jersey stars, Teresa and Joe Giudice faced potential prison sentences for fraud and tax evasion in August 2014. Real Housewives of Beverly Hills star Dana Ann Wilkey made news headlines for her own alleged crimes. According to the FBI, Wilkey was indicted by a federal grand jury in California for a handful of fraud-related charges, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aiding and abetting, and making false statements to government agents. Wilkey, who was 41 years old at the time, allegedly conspired with 2 business partners, 50-year-old Skylar Phoenix and 51-year-old Lisa Phoenix, to enter a fraudulent contract with their healthcare company in the form of payment for work that was never done in exchange for unlawfully providing certain benefits to Wilkey's company. The first part of the scheme allegedly went on for a 6.5-year period, starting in 2004, with the kickbacks accounting to roughly $500,000 in illegally pocketed funds for the Phoenixes. There was also a second part to the scheme, which consisted of Wilkey paying roughly $360,000 in unlawful kickbacks to the Phoenixes and a shell company that the couple owned. This allegedly occurred over a 6-year period from 2006 to 2012, with the funds coming in the form of 87 checks. By the time the feds got involved, Wilkey had caught her fiancé cheating and had relocated to Miami, while the Phoenixes were living in San Jose, California. All 3 parties pleaded not guilty and were released on $250,000 bond, pending the outcomes of their cases. If convicted as charged, they could have faced up to 20 years in prison and 5 years of probation, along with a fine of up to $250,000, or twice the gross gain or loss. 2 years after the arrests, Wilkey pleaded guilty to 1 count of misprision of a felony, which is when someone fails to inform the authorities about a felony that they know has been committed. While limited details on the outcome of the case are available, Wilkey revealed through a series of tweets in 2020 that the matter was settled and claimed that no fraud had been committed. She also mentioned that she did not go to prison but took a defensive tone and was clearly sick of people asking about the situation. 7. Danielle Staub. Before she was known as one of the Real Housewives of New Jersey, Danielle Staub went by the name Beverly Ann Merrill. In 1986, she was arrested in Miami in connection with a drug deal gone bad, and it landed her in jail for a month. The victim, Carmen Cantalella, and Staub each told a much different version of the story and how the crime went down. In her memoir, The Naked Truth, Staub claimed that she introduced Cantalella to some friends of hers that were drug dealers, and that Cantalella bought some drugs for the purpose of reselling them. She further accused her former neighbor of claiming that some guys had robbed him after the sale, and that he duped the neighbors to make her look bad. Cantalella, on the other hand, claimed that Staub was an acquaintance who he had used cocaine with from time to time. He was unaware that Staub had become a reality star until her ex-husband, Kevin Marr, contacted him and asked for his testimony in a lawsuit against Staub, who accused Marr of beating and abusing her before their divorce. According to Kentalella, she was tempted to ask Staub to hook him up with 2 kilograms of cocaine after she bragged about her connections with the drug world. He planned to sell the drugs to 2 people who lived in Staub's apartment complex. But on the day of the planned sale, Staub allegedly arrived with just 1 kilo of the drug in her possession. She reportedly said that they were going to do the sale one at a time, only for the buyers to pull a gun and run off with the cocaine in hand and without paying for it. Kentalella claimed that Staub got angry and dragged him back to her apartment, where her boyfriend at the time, Daniel Aguilar, and Marr were waiting. Aguilar and Marr allegedly took Kentalella to a safe house where they tied him up, beat him in the face and head, choked him, and shoved a gun in his mouth. According to Kentalella's version of events, his alleged attackers demanded money for the stolen drugs. He called up his father and asked for the money, knowing that his dad didn't have it, but using the conversation as an opportunity to talk to him one last time in case his captors killed him that night. The good news is that Kentalella survived the ordeal. Staub denied having any involvement in the kidnapping, but she admitted to having a conversation with Kentalella's father about the $24,000 debt he allegedly owed for the drugs. Instead of catering to the demand, Kentalella's dad went to the FBI, and agents lured the captors to a bogus Western Union transaction. Kentalella served prison time for his role in the botched scheme, but his father's decision to call the authorities may have saved his life. Aguilar also served time, but Staub got off the hook with 5 years of probation in exchange for her cooperation. These not-so-flattering details about Staub's past first emerged after her first appearance in the Real Housewives of New Jersey series. And to this day, each party has their own version of the story, and they're sticking to it. 6. Lindsay Shyer. In August 2023, a 36-year-old mother of 3 and former beauty queen from Georgia named Lindsay Shyer was accused of conspiring with her boyfriend, 28-year-old Terrence Adrian Bethel, to murder her insurance executive husband, 38-year-old Robert Shyer. According to authorities, Lindsay and Bethel hired 29-year-old Farron Newbold Jr. to carry out the hit. The Shiers were estranged from one another and entangled in an acrimonious divorce and child custody battle when investigators learned about the alleged murder-for-hire plot, which was apparently concocted in the Bahamas. Robert and Lindsay were also reportedly fighting over their $2.5 million mansion in Thomasville, Georgia, their private jet, and their other assets. Police discovered evidence of the plot while investigating a break-in at a bar and grill where Bethel worked and discovering incriminating messages on a suspect's phone. Shortly before the arrests of Lindsay, Bethel, and Newbold, Robert Shyer hired a private investigator to track his wife's movements and discovered her infidelity. He reportedly confronted Lindsay with photos of her and Bethel together and told Bethel, "Thanks for taking care of my wife," before filing for divorce on grounds of adulterous conduct. In her response, Lindsay accused Robert of physical and emotional abuse. She also allegedly greenlighted the plot to murder her estranged husband with a text to Bethel stating, "Kill him." After spending 19 days behind bars in Nassau's infamous Fox Hill prison, Lindsay pleaded not guilty and was released on an ankle bracelet and a $100,000 bond. She must remain in the Bahamas as she awaits her trial and is required to check in with authorities 3 times per week. Lindsay must also abide by an 8 p.m. curfew and cannot leave her apartment before 5 o'clock in the morning. And she's banned from contacting or going near her soon-to-be ex-husband, who formerly played football for Auburn University in Alabama. Her co-defendants, Bethel and Newbold, were each released on $20,000 bail and are also required to wear ankle monitors. During an interview with the New York Post, Lindsay said that her life has been tough since her arrest, but she declined to go into detail, stating that she can't speak about it. 5. Jen Shah. Over a nearly decade-long period starting in 2012, Real Housewives of Salt Lake City star Jen Shah participated in a telemarketing scam that cheated hundreds of people out of their own hard-earned money. Shah's arrest in 2021 came on the heels of the Utah spin-off's first season. The 47-year-old was hit with federal wire fraud charges alongside her assistant, 43-year-old Stuart Smith of Leahy. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, Shah and her co-conspirators sold tax preparation and other services to business owners that they advised as ways to make the victims' companies more efficient and profitable. In an indictment listing the charges, the feds pointed out that many of the victims were over 55 years old and didn't own computers. The culprits used third-party names to avoid incriminating themselves and allegedly instructed their victims to communicate with them through encrypted messages to further prevent detection. They also had victims send payments to offshore bank accounts and sold lead lists containing vulnerable victims to other scammers who were involved in the scheme. Shortly before she was scheduled to go to trial in July of 2022, Shah admitted to her role in the 9-year-long operation. She had originally pleaded not guilty and had maintained her innocence even after Smith pleaded guilty to his charges. But she had a change of heart as the trial loomed and ultimately pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud in connection with telemarketing. In exchange for her willingness to admit to the charge, prosecutors agreed to drop a separate charge for conspiracy to commit money laundering. The prosecution requested a sentence of up to 14 years in federal prison, but the judge imposed a 6.5-year sentence and ordered Shah to pony up $6.5 million and to pay $9.5 million in restitution. Prison records list her tentative release date as 2028, which means that she'll serve about 5 years behind bars and is eligible for early release. 4. Kim DePaula. During the early morning hours one day in March 2017, residents in a Paterson, New Jersey neighborhood awoke to the sound of 2 gunshots. When they looked outside, they saw an Audi engulfed in flames. Inside were the badly burned bodies of 2 murder victims, both of whom had been shot in the head execution style. Firefighters had to cut through the roof of the car in order to extract the bodies. One insider told the press that the victims were charred beyond recognition, to the point where responding officers were initially unable to determine their gender or race. Both individuals were later identified as men. According to police, the Audi belonged to former Real Housewives of New Jersey star Kim DePaula, better known as Kim D. The car was reportedly mostly used by Kim's son, Chris Camascioli, but he had loaned it to a 27-year-old man named Aaron Anderson, who was eventually identified as one of the victims. Authorities identified the other victim as 25-year-old Antonio Vega Jr. And as it turned out, DePaula and her son were not involved in the crime. Shortly after the murders, DePaula told TMZ that she and Chris were broken-hearted over the victims' deaths. Shortly after the double homicide, authorities announced the arrests of 26-year-old Clarence Williams and 28-year-old Gary Thomas on charges of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, robbery, arson, and possession of a firearm. Prosecutors argued that it was the result of a robbery and/or drug deal gone bad, and that the suspects set the car ablaze in an attempt to cover up their crime. But it didn't work, and both Thomas and Williams were convicted on multiple charges related to the murders. Thomas was originally sentenced to 80 years in prison, but had his conviction reversed on appeal due to a faulty interrogation. He was granted a new trial in 2021, and the current status of the case is unclear. Williams was sentenced to 25 years with the possibility of parole after 21 years. It's unclear whether Thomas's overturned conviction has affected his case. 3. The murder of Dan Markel. Wendy Adon and Dan Markel were both fresh out of law school when they married in 2006. After failing to land a job in the couple's first choice city of Miami, Dan became a law professor at Florida State University in Tallahassee. Wendy also took a job with the university, but her priorities changed when she and Dan became parents to 2 boys. The children became her main focus, and life in the Florida Panhandle eventually began to weigh on Wendy. She grew to hate living there and was desperate to move back to South Florida, where her well-to-do family lived and ran a successful chain of dental practices that her father had started years earlier. In the meantime, Wendy's marriage to Dan began to fail, and in 2013, they divorced. Like many former couples, Wendy and Dan became locked in a contentious child custody battle. Wendy wanted to move their son to Miami, while Dan had no intentions or desire to move, and did not approve of the children moving so far away. He fought in court to prevent that from happening and was successful, much to the ire of Wendy's mother, Donna Adelson. It was clear, based on emails exchanged between the mother and daughter, that Donna despised Dan, perhaps even more so than Wendy did. In the messages, Donna mocked, belittled, insulted, and wished horrible things on her former son-in-law. She very obviously wanted Dan out of the picture so that Wendy could move back to Miami and bring the children with her. Donna got her wish in July of 2014 when someone fatally shot Dan in the driveway of his home while he was talking on the phone and standing next to his car. The Adelsons adamantly denied any involvement in Dan's murder, but investigators failed to come up with any other logical leads regarding who might have wanted him dead. 3 more years went by before detectives finally obtained enough evidence to arrest 34-year-old Sigfredo Garcia with Dan's murder in 2016. Suspecting that Dan's death was the result of a murder for hire, their new goal was to figure out how Garcia was connected with the Adelsons. In a subsequent affidavit, prosecutors accused Garcia and 33-year-old Luis Rivera of traveling from South Florida to Tallahassee in a rented car to carry out the hit. The suspects were tied to the crime via motel records, surveillance footage, expressway pass data, eyewitness accounts, and other evidence. Authorities soon discovered that the mother of Garcia's children, Catherine Magbanua, had romantic ties to Wendy Adelson's brother, Charlie Adelson. They theorized that Catherine had arranged the hit at Charlie's request, and that Charlie asked Catherine to arrange the hit at his mother Donna's request. Garcia, Rivera, and Magbanua were all charged with murder. Meanwhile, the Adelsons denied any involvement, and there still wasn't enough evidence to charge any of them in connection with the case. The 3 accused suspects eventually began to talk while the authorities remained focused on gathering more evidence to build a case against the Adelsons with. After all, none of the 3 defendants had reasons of their own to kill Dan Markle. They didn't even know him. Garcia pleaded guilty in 2019 and received a life sentence, while Magbanua's trial ended in a hung jury. In 2022, prosecutors finally felt they had a strong enough evidence to charge Charlie Adelson with murder, and he was convicted the following year. Within 3 weeks of Charlie's guilty verdict, authorities charged 73-year-old Donna Adelson with Dan's murder, most likely because they feel confident about their ability to secure a conviction after their success with Charlie's trial. Donna was picked up at the Miami airport while trying to flee to Vietnam, which does not have an extradition treaty with the United States. She's currently being held without bond pending the outcome of her case and has pleaded not guilty. Wendy Adelson has not been charged in connection with the case, and it remains unclear whether she knew about the plot to have Dan killed. Some legal experts have speculated that her family did not tell her about the plan because they wanted to protect her, while others believe she was in on the plot all along. Nearly a decade after Dan's murder, the truth is still unfolding, and it seems as though some mysteries surrounding the case may never be solved. 2. Dorothy Ann McDevitt Andrews. Dorothy Ann McDevitt Andrews of Corunna, Michigan was so good at being a housewife that she was named the state's Homemaker of the Year in 1979. The title came on the heels of numerous other baking and cooking awards that the 40-year-old mother of 4 had previously won. But Andrews took a devious turn from her seemingly virtuous ways in 1980, when she was accused of fatally shooting her unemployed 28-year-old husband, Terry, with a .22 caliber rifle. According to the medical examiner who performed Terry's autopsy, the victim took 2 bullets to the jaw. Dorothy's son from a previous relationship, David, called the police to report the shooting. Responding officers arrived to find Terry lying dead in a pool of blood on the floor of the home. And they were quick to arrest Dorothy, even though she suffered from multiple sclerosis and relied on a wheelchair. She was released on a $50,000 bond after being booked on a first-degree murder charge. While explaining the decision to allow Andrews to post bond, the judge overseeing the case explained that he did not believe the defendant was a danger to the community. He also said that there was no reason to believe that Dorothy was a flight risk, and that it would be extremely difficult to house a wheelchair-bound individual in the local jail. Meanwhile, Dorothy's attorney explained that she may have killed Terry as a reaction to abuse in the marriage. During questioning, she reportedly claimed that Terry had beaten and tortured her numerous times throughout their marriage, which lasted less than a year. She claimed that her deceased husband typically hit her in the back of the head where nobody could see the bruising, as a way to punish her or make her do something that he wanted. Dorothy also accused Terry of threatening her with a butcher knife and burning her with cigarettes. On at least one previous occasion, she had left the home and lived in a battered women's shelter. Dorothy's son, David, testified during a preliminary hearing, telling the court that he overheard Dorothy yelling, "I shot him! I shot him! Oh God, please help!" David further explained that he rushed downstairs after hearing 2 loud noises a few seconds apart from one another. He entered his mother's bedroom to find her sitting there with a gun in her hands, while Terry gasped for air nearby. But Dorothy never denied shooting Terry. In fact, she admitted to it right away. But she claimed she was innocent because she did what was necessary to escape the physical and mental torture that Terry allegedly inflicted upon her. The case was still ongoing 2 years later. Dorothy's first trial ended in a hung jury. She refused to plead to a lesser charge, even if it meant going through another murder trial and risking a guilty verdict because she strongly believed in her innocence. Unfortunately, the outcome of Dorothy's case remains unclear. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Michelle Hughes. By the time Michelle Leinen's past caught up with her in 2007, she was living as a doctor's housewife and a stay-at-home mom named Michelle Hughes in Olympia, Washington. Michelle's checkered history began back in 1994 when she was working as a stripper at the Great Alaskan Bush Company in Anchorage. During her time there, she befriended a lonely fisherman named Kent Lepink, and the two soon began dating. It wasn't long before Michelle quit her job at Kent's urging and moved in with him. The couple also got engaged, even though Kent was just one of at least 3 men that Michelle was involved with throughout their relationship. One of her other men, John Carlin III, even moved in with her and Kent as a roommate at one point. Kent Lepink was shot dead in Hope, Alaska in 1996. Investigators theorized that Leinen and Carlin conspired to murder him in order to 1. Get him out of the way, and 2. To collect on his $1 million life insurance policy. If that's true, then Michelle was probably rather disappointed to learn that she had been removed as the beneficiary of Kent's policy just days before his murder. Kent had also written a letter to his parents stating that if anything bad happened to him, that Michelle, Carlin, and Michelle's third lover, Scott Hilk, were probably responsible. At the time of Kent's murder, Michelle was visiting Hilk in California. Police nevertheless suspected that she had masterminded the crime, even if she didn't physically pull the trigger. They believed that she used her feminine wiles to persuade Carlin to carry out the crime while she was away, so that she would have a seemingly solid alibi. But with a lack of direct evidence tying the suspects to the case, years went by before they were able to make any arrests. Authorities revisited the cold case in 2005 when they interviewed Carlin's son, who was a minor at the time of the murder and had been prevented from talking to police by his dad. He gave information tying his father and Linehan to the murder weapon, along with other damning details. Linehan and Carlin were charged with Lempink's murder in 2007 and were ultimately found guilty. Both their convictions were eventually overturned. But by then, Carlin had died in prison. Many still believe Linehan had something to do with Lempink's death, but prosecutors declined to pursue another trial. She now continues to live freely, but has not been able to fully escape the public scrutiny of her suspected participation in Kent Lempink's murder.
Number 8. Witness shot to death. 21-year-old Kelsey Schelling was pregnant when she went missing in 2012. Her ex-boyfriend and the child's father, Dante Lucas, had asked her to drive from Denver to his hometown of Pueblo in Colorado. He told her that he had a big surprise planned for her. Schelling didn't turn up for work the next day, and after a worried co-worker called her mother, an 8-year-long ordeal began for their family. When Lucas was contacted, he told her mother that Schelling had called him from a private number and that she would be contacting them soon. Lucas was questioned by the police, but his story didn't match up to the CCTV footage found in the Walmart parking lot where he said he met his girlfriend. For the first couple of years into the investigation, Schelling was thought to be missing. Her mother still hoped for her return after years and even set up a Facebook page to help spread the word. In 2017, when the authorities had enough evidence against Lucas, they charged him with first-degree murder. In 2021, his trial began, but the case faced a major setback. 31-year-old Roxanne Martinez was all set to testify against Lucas. Martinez's testimony was especially important for the case because, according to the district attorney, Lucas had confessed to her about the murder. But on February 25th, Roxanne was found dead from a gunshot wound. The Denver Police Department said that her death wasn't related to the case, but Martinez's cousin believes otherwise. According to the cousin, there was a big possibility that Martinez was murdered because of the ongoing case. It can't just be a coincidence, right? Despite Martinez's murder, Schelling's family got their justice. 29-year-old Dante Lucas was found guilty of murder by the jury in February 2021 and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 7. Witness faked a story. Witnesses are a crucial part of any trial, especially eyewitnesses. There's nothing better than getting a witness who saw the crime take place. But sometimes things can get out of hand, especially when the witness turns out to be the villain. In 1994, George Radcliffe was found dead in his pickup truck in North Carolina. A year later, Montoya Dante Sharp was charged with the murder. Years later, in 2019, Sharp was pardoned by a judge after authorities found that a witness had completely made up the story leading to Sharp's sentence. When the trial for Radcliffe's murder was going on, the prosecutors called 15-year-old Charlene Johnson as a witness. Johnson testified that she saw Sharp and Radcliffe in an argument. According to her statement, the two were fighting over a drug deal. Johnson claimed that she saw Sharp with another man, trying to hoard Radcliffe into a truck. The two then crashed the vehicle in a vacant lot and threw away the key. Johnson said the altercation was face-to-face, and that's when Radcliffe was shot. However, that doesn't hold true since the medical examiner's notes say that the bullet was fired from far away. The examiner hadn't heard Johnson's testimony during the trial and couldn't highlight the mismatch. A few weeks after the ruling, Johnson took back her testimony, but that didn't mean Sharp could change his sentence. It took him 24 long years to finally get freedom from the wrongful conviction. Johnson's statements weren't just exaggerated, they were completely false. She wasn't present at the time of the murder, but could give her story in such detail because she just made it up based on television shows. This grave mistake took 2 decades of Sharp's life. Number 6. Parrot witness. Some criminals leave evidence, some criminals leave witnesses. But what about the ones that leave none? How do you find the culprit, and more importantly, how do you solve the case? Real life is not like those movies where a detective conveniently finds important clues that lead to the crime. Well, sometimes it is though. In this case, a crucial witness was left behind who had seen the gruesome crime, but the court couldn't use their testimony. In 2015, Martin Durham from Michigan was shot dead, and his wife Glenna was injured from a gunshot. Other than the two, nobody else saw what actually went down, but their pet, an African gray parrot named Bud, saw more than he should have. Martin's ex-wife Christina took the pet and realized that the parrot was repeating the conversation Glenna and he had had on the night of the murder. The parrot repeated the argument they were having, and it ended with the words, "Don't shoot." Martin's mother also believes that Bud might have picked up on the heated argument. That bird picks up everything and anything, and it's got the filthiest mouth around. She told the BBC News. Using Bud's statement would have made the case against Glenna stronger. A prosecutor in the trial even considered using Bud's squawking as evidence, but the plan was dismissed. Bud was never called to testify during the trial, and his recording wasn't used either. Fortunately, the other evidence in the case was enough to prove that Glenna had shot her husband 5 times before trying to kill herself. She was charged with first-degree murder in 2017 and was sentenced to life behind bars. Number 5. Witness in murder trial found dead. In 2011, Michaela Mikarivi was on her honeymoon in Mauritius. She was the daughter of a well-known football manager, Mickey Hart. Sadly, she was found strangled to death in her hotel room. Her death caught widespread media attention. It was also the first murder of a tourist in Mauritius. But the trial got even more twisted when a key witness of the case was also found murdered. On the 10th of January, Michaela and her husband John finished lunch at their hotel. After the meal, Michaela decided to head back to the room to get some biscuits for their tea. According to the investigators, when she entered the room, she was pinned to the ground and strangled. Michaela was found in the bath with the water still running. When she didn't return to the table, John went to check on her and found her lifeless body. 3 male workers of the hotel were arrested, and the trial began in 2012. Avinash Trihubun and Sandip Monia were charged with murder, and Raj Trikoi was charged with conspiracy to murder. According to a DNA test by a forensic expert in England, no DNA traces of the subjects were found on Michaela's body. More controversies arose when Avinash alleged that the major crime investigation team had beaten a confession out of him. A 9-member jury found the men not guilty. In June 2021, the Mauritius government agreed to take another look at the murder. This time, one of the main accused, Raj Trikoi, had agreed to be a witness. He was reported missing by his wife, and a day later, on the 3rd of October, his dead body was found near a junkyard. His mysterious death was speculated to be a suicide, but the investigation is ongoing. What do you think happened? Was it suicide or another homicide? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give us a like and share the video. For more interesting stories, stay with us till the end. Number 4. Key witness killed. In September 2018, 26-year-old accountant Botham Sham John was in his apartment when off-duty Dallas cop Amber Geiger entered and shot him to death. Geiger lived in the same building but on the floor above Jean. In her defense, she said that she mistook Jean's house as hers and thought he was an intruder. She was initially charged with manslaughter, but the conviction was later changed to murder when her racial biases came to light. Geiger was found to have an intent to kill, especially because she didn't follow police protocol of not entering a building if there's a potential burglar. The correct order would be to call for backup. During the trial, Jean's across-the-hall neighbor Joshua Brown was a key witness. Brown was returning from a football game and was in the hall of the building when he heard two people talking. It was followed by gunshots. Brown ran to safety and later returned to his apartment. He stated in his testimony that he saw Geiger talk on her phone before the officers arrived. His testimony was one of the key factors that put Geiger behind bars for 10 years, and the reason justice was actually served. But only a few days after the trial, Brown was also shot dead. It sparked a huge outrage, and people started speculating that his murder was revenge for the testimony against Geiger. I just spoke with Joshua Brown's mother. She is devastated. We all are. Joshua Brown was a key witness in the murder of Botham Jean that helped put Amber Geiger away. We need answers. Jean's lawyer, Lee Merritt, said. The murder caught the attention of many politicians as well. In December 2019, 3 men were charged with Brown's murder. According to police reports, it was a drug deal gone bad. The murderers were an uncle and nephew pair who drove 300 miles to Dallas. The trio wanted to kill Brown, but met up with him on the pretext of buying drugs. They are truly heinous criminals. Number 3, missing before trial. Christopher James Losell, a former stockbroker from Largo, put himself in dangerous waters when he decided to borrow money from loan sharks. Losell had borrowed $40,000 from the Basha brothers that owned a water scooter business in Florida. The man also had ties with the Lucchesi, a prominent crime family from New York. The deal was that Losell would return the money in 45 days at a 50% interest rate. Losell failed to return the money, and the lawless family sure wasn't pleased with that. The 30-year-old was later kidnapped from his home by 4 men in 2004. They threatened him and assaulted him in an attempt to get the money back. When they let him go, Losell went straight to the cops and filed a kidnapping case against the Bashas. However, things took a grim turn right before the trial. Losell was supposed to stand as a witness in the extortion and kidnapping case. But on the eve of the accused kidnapper's trial, Losell was nowhere to be found. Initially, it wasn't clear whether Losell had left on his own or if he was kidnapped again. A warrant was issued against Losell for failing to turn up on the day of the trial. But not long after, Tampa police found his car with its windows open and the key still in ignition. On March 15, 2005, Losell was found murdered in Manatee County. He had 5 gunshot wounds in his chest. Losell's death meant that he couldn't give his crucial testimony for the case. But the recorded statements he gave to the investigators about the kidnapping, along with taped calls between him and the Bashas, were still used as evidence. Based on that, the jury found 2 of the men innocent of kidnapping. The jury couldn't reach a verdict on the other 2 accused. All of the men denied any ties with Losell's murder and even passed polygraph tests. The investigators stated that there were no other leads in the investigation, and today the bloodthirsty criminals roam the streets free. Number 2, made-up testimony. Doris Washington and her 13-year-old daughter Nishanda were found dead in their home back in 1991. The firefighters found their bodies on the bed of their burning home. A year later, Angela Oliver's statement became a key testimony that put suspect Daryl Howard behind bars. Howard had always maintained that he didn't murder the mother and daughter and that someone else was responsible. Now, almost 26 years later, Oliver has stated that she never actually witnessed any murder. She recanted her statement and said that she was forced to say it by the lead detective, Daryl Dowdy. During the trial in 1995, Oliver declined to answer questions and was treated as a hostile witness. Since she refused to help, a recording of her statement was played to the jury. In the recording, Oliver said Howard had threatened to kill Doris Washington if she didn't come up with his drugs or money. She described how Howard and his brother went back to Doris's house and beat her. Oliver revealed that Howard said he had to burn them since he didn't want to leave behind any evidence. In a federal civil trial that began this November, Howard stated that Dowdy's evidence tampering violated his right to a fair trial. He also stated that Dowdy fed Oliver the information that was used in her recorded testimony. Dowdy refused all the allegations against him. New evidence revealed traces of semen on Doris's body. The DNA matched that of Jermick Jones, who was 15 at the time and was associated with the New York Boys. This group was a violent gang that used young boys for their crimes since they were less likely to face harsher sentences. Dowdy had allegedly received a tip about the gang but ignored it. Howard was pardoned in April 2020 after serving more than 2 decades of jail time for a crime he did not commit. Talk about a failure of the system. Number 1. Testifying from the grave. As always, we save the best for the last. How can a dead person be a witness? It sounds impossible, right? Well, not in this case. It was not some spooky trial with a ghost. The reality was actually very practical. Nicolas Quintanilla from California had allegedly shot and killed his girlfriend. A day after the murder, he was arrested at his home and the trial began soon after. During the proceedings, the prosecutor called many witnesses to the stand who testified against Quintanilla. They spoke of the abusive relationship he had with his girlfriend. There were no eyewitnesses, and most of the statements revolved around past conversations. The victim had complained about his abusive behavior to many friends, and this was the main evidence the prosecutors used. The victim was the main witness of the crime, and she was dead. So the prosecutors had to resort to using conversations she had about Quintanilla. Was she speaking from the grave? Technically, no, but also, in a way, yes. Such testimonies are called hearsay. Usually hearsay is not accepted in courts because there is no way the testimony can be examined for accuracy. The witnesses who spoke about Quintanilla's abusive behavior gave hearsay evidence since they were providing statements from the deceased victim that could not be examined. But Quintanilla's case was different. The prosecutors came up with an idea to use forfeiture by wrongdoing, another rule in the court of law. Under this rule, the lawyers managed to convince jurors that he killed the girlfriend, so she couldn't testify against him in court. The dead victim's statements were recorded, and Quintanilla was found guilty of murder. But his lawyer appealed that the statements couldn't be taken into account. He argued that since there's not enough evidence to prove that Quintanilla killed her to keep her from testifying, the forfeiture by wrongdoing rule couldn't be used. The conviction against him was reversed. Number 12. In the wrong hands. Everyone makes mistakes, but how often do those mistakes cost us our lives? Sometimes a small error in judgment can cause havoc, and unfortunately for this pilot, things went poorly. On June 26, 2018, in New York, a private plane was about to take off on a flight to Los Angeles. All was going well until the pilot noticed something wrong. In case you didn't know, pilots are assisted by operators in communications towers through a radio. The pilot noticed that there was a problem with his radio. It had been cut off due to technical issues, and he wasn't able to contact the tower to get a takeoff confirmation. Meanwhile, the tower on the ground was getting worried since they hadn't heard from the plane. But in situations like this, there's always a plan B in place. By punching a 4-digit code in on a console, the tower could be notified of the technical error. But in his rush to reach the tower, the voiceless pilot accidentally triggered the hijacked alert code. All hell broke loose at the tower, where officials alerted SWAT teams to handle the matter. This went on for hours, with alarmed passengers wondering why in the world was their flight delayed. While this was happening, the pilot, unable to contact the tower or reassure the passengers, managed to successfully communicate about the false alarm, but not before 3 long hours had passed. Number 11. Bullet in the Sky. On October 22, 2021, in Chicago, USA, a business jet was all set to take off. And as usual, inspectors stepped in to inspect the plane for any safety violations or faulty parts. While they didn't find any of that, what they did see left them dumbfounded. A small piece of metal lodged into the business jet's left wing. When they investigated further into what it could be, it turned out to be a bullet. Where did the bullet come from, and who fired the bullet? The answers to these questions weren't revealed to the public, but we can't help but wonder if it was a stray bullet or one that was directed toward somebody. The damage to the jet has been deemed harmless, but it's still mysterious. If it had been aimed slightly higher, it could have taken out a window or maybe even a passenger. Number 10. Flying high. On November 3, 2021, in a fancy Chicago neighborhood, a private jet that just got back from a trip to Mexico showed some suspicious interactions. Though it's not uncommon for a fancy private jet to arrive at an international airport, the authorities were having second thoughts. Despite their suspicions, they didn't have a warrant, so the private jet went on unsearched. But it certainly wasn't their lucky day, as the authorities were soon notified of drug dealers that recently arrived in the area. The informant's tip turned out to be true, and officers were able to bust 3 men in a hotel carrying 100 kilos of cocaine. The 3 men, Sebastian, Alexis, and Sergio, allegedly arrived on the same private jet that flagged off suspicion. Having passed through security with that much cocaine won't work out well for them in a trial. The 3 dealers have been taken into custody and will have to face the wrath of the judicial system. But there's a pretty high chance they're going to prison. Number 9. Bursting into flames. How often do you think planes catch on fire? As you might have guessed, the probability is low, but not zero. On October 19, 2021, in a small Houston airport, a private jet containing 18 passengers and 3 crew members was about to peacefully take off and set course to Boston for a Major League Baseball championship game, when things took an ugly turn. What was supposed to be a fun trip wound up as a near-death experience. So here's what happened. As the private jet was about to take off, one of the engines failed, causing a fuselage explosion that spread a raging fire across the length of the jet. All the passengers and crew members miraculously escaped safely, with only 2 bearing non-life-threatening injuries. The passengers were likely traumatized by the event, but there's no doubt things could have gone much worse. What's your biggest fear when it comes to airplanes? Let us know in the comments, and subscribe if you like what you've seen so far. Number 8. Man who saves lives loses his. We often idolize doctors, but this doesn't mean they can't get into any trouble. And this is exactly what happened to Dr. Reuben Cohen. On July 3, 2021, in Colorado, a private jet plane owned by the world-famous surgeon Reuben Cohen was en route to explore the skies just for fun. Dr. Cohen was actually a licensed pilot himself. Unfortunately, the doctor, along with his aviator, David Zara, decided to explore the mountains outside of Aspen, known to be a tricky and dangerous spot for flying. As they took off and enjoyed their time, an unfortunate turn of events began to unfold. The surgeon and his pilot met their end amid the cold ridges of the treacherous mountains. Dr. Cohen could have saved many more lives, but no one can escape fate, not even someone who helps others defy it. Number 7. Private plane crashes into a house. When you're just relaxing at home, the last thing you'd expect would be a plane crash landing into your house. But sadly, one unlucky homeowner got to experience this terrifying event. On November 18th in South Chicago, a 3,000-kilogram cargo plane took off from a nearby airport. It was bound for another spot. When mid-flight, the pilot reported engine problems to the tower. The tower responded by changing the pilot's route to make an emergency landing on a nearby runway. The pilot followed the orders. Sadly, that would be the last time they'd ever hear from the pilot. When the authorities checked, the plane was recognized as the one which had been rerouted. Although nobody else was harmed, the pilot of the plane died in the crash. The homeowners were utterly shocked to see a massive plane crash into their home, but they were able to get out safely without any injuries. This story makes us believe that it is never too late to expect the unexpected or get home insurance. Number 6. First flight, last flight. Live for something rather than die for nothing is a quote that most soldiers stick to with all their heart. They willingly lay down their lives to protect a country and its citizens. On July 4, 2021, in Sulu, Philippines, a private military plane containing 96 fresh graduates from military training were en route to finally assume their duties in Sulu, but not all of them made it. While mid-flight, the military plane missed the runway for its destination and was asked to route its way back. Out of the blue, the engines failed and the plane came crashing down into a nearby town, killing 45 soldiers and injuring 49 more. Apart from the soldiers, a few civilians were also hurt. It was not the first time such an accident happened, but it is something we hope to never see again. Number 5. Engine failure. How far can your wealth take you? Can death discriminate between the rich and the poor? Sadly, no matter how much you have or how little, death doesn't discriminate. On October 4, 2021, in Milan, Italy, the 68-year-old Romanian billionaire Petrescu decided to visit Italy using his private jet, bringing along his wife and his child. They prepared for a fun trip, not realizing that it would be their last. At the time, Petrescu had just received his pilot's license and planned a trip for Milan while flying his own private plane. Unfortunately, mid-flight and way before they reached the airport, an engine failure occurred and the sound of an explosion echoed over Milan. The remnants of the plane later crashed into a building down below. Petrescu, his wife, and his 30-year-old son, as well as 5 others, perished. The cause for the engine failure is yet to be known, but there is nothing more we can do about it. The damage has been done, and nobody can undo this devastating tragedy. Number 4. Florida's tragic crash. As we've said before, things can happen when you least expect them to. On March 15, 2021, in Florida, a private plane was traveling over a neighborhood in Pembroke Pines when the plane got too low for comfort and started to take a nosedive. Before the 2 people inside realized, the plane had already been caught up in a power line, causing them to fall down, but not before slamming into a passing SUV in a head-on collision. What's worse is that the SUV had a mother and her child inside. The crash was caught on camera, and fire is seen spreading through the street immediately after the direct impact. By the time help arrived, the 2 pilots were dead on the spot. As for the mother and her child, they were brought to the hospital with grievous wounds. Out of the 2, the child did not survive. Fate, my friends, has a funny way of playing things out. Number 3. Joe Lara's private plane crash. Tarzan was a childhood classic, a story we all loved, and a character that we all knew. One of the first actors to portray the icon was Joe Lara. Unfortunately, with all the memories he left for us, he himself became one. On May 29, 2021, in Florida, Hollywood actor Joe Lara went on a ride in his private plane with his wife and another famous author, Gwen Shamlin. The 2 were heading to Florida's beaches for a vacation. However, instead of relaxation and relief, tragedy and grief struck them. The plane that Joe and Gwen were flying in suddenly malfunctioned mid-air, causing it to dive head down into a lake. The crash into water had enough inertia to crush everything inside of it. Unfortunately, Joe and Gwen experienced this firsthand, leading to their deaths. Joe was 58 years old at the time of the crash. It is tragic for many fans who had known Joe since his days as Tarzan, or those that were fans of Gwen's books, and the fact that we'll never see them is still sinking in for many. Number 2. Delta flight almost gets hijacked. A hijack, one of the most fear-inducing situations to be in, could either be a train or a boat hijack. But the worst hijack crimes have taken place in planes. In August of 2021, somewhere between Afghanistan and Iran, a Ukrainian private plane carrying passengers evacuating out of Afghanistan was sent to pick up Ukrainians who were stuck between the war and their country. However, they were unaware of the risk and the situation that was about to unfold. When the Ukrainian plane arrived, it picked up an unknown number of passengers, prepared to be evacuated to Kiev in Ukraine from war-torn Afghanistan. They had no idea that some of them were not mere passengers. Mid-flight, the hijackers revealed themselves in the plane, taking all unidentified passengers hostage. Despite how dangerous the situation was, the hijackers flew the plane into Iran, and miraculously, all the passengers were safely returned to Kabul, where the plane landed. It's unclear how or why and what the motives of the hijackers were, but one thing's for sure, they were up to no good. Number 1. Pilot and his wife died 4 days after their wedding. "Till death do us part" is often said in marriage vows, but few couples actually have to face this tragic situation. On October 5, 2020, somewhere in the United States, a couple got married and were on their way to their honeymoon when bad luck struck. 30-year-old Kostas John Sivilis, a United Airlines pilot, and his wife, 33-year-old Lindsay Vogelaar, wrapped up their mountaintop wedding on October 1st and were initially planning to return back home after a couple of days. That is, until they reached the 4th day of their trip. Before the day of the crash, the couple had been blogging and sharing their honeymoon and celebrating through videos. Since Mr. Sivilis was a pilot, they both decided to end their honeymoon on a good note and rented a private plane to go back home. Unfortunately, before they even reached the standard altitude for planes, the engines failed midway, causing the couple to plummet to their imminent deaths. The cause of the engine failure is unclear, and authorities are baffled by how such an experienced pilot would fail to see a faulty plane. Hopefully, they are still together in the afterlife.
Number 11. Thomas B. Jadlowski. 43-year-old Rosemary Bilquist was walking her dogs in a field behind her Sherman, New York home in 2017 when she was shot and killed by a 33-year-old Chautauqua County resident named Thomas B. Jadlowski. He was out hunting during the legal hunting season, but after legal hours, when he mistook Miss Bilquist for a deer and fired a lethal bullet at her. Jadlowski heard the woman screaming. He found her unresponsive and dialed 911. She died from her injuries. Police charged Jadlowski with criminally negligent homicide. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 1 to 3 years in state prison for the crime. Bilquist's husband, Jamie, told Erie News Now that he wanted the defendant held accountable from the very beginning. He also said that he hopes hunters remember the consequences that Jadlowski suffered from hunting after legal hours, and that the tragedy compels them to just go home instead. District Attorney Patrick Swanson expressed similar sentiments, stating that he hoped the case would remind hunters of what can happen when basic rules go unfollowed and when guns are used without caution and care. Swanson also said that he hopes Jadlowski will use his experience to raise awareness among hunters about these dangers once he was released from prison. Number 10. A father-daughter tragedy. 11-year-old Daisy Grace Lynn George was hunting in Harrison County, Texas, late last year when her father accidentally shot her with his high-powered rifle. He was cleaning the gun, which he thought was emptied of bullets, when it fired a bullet into the girl's body. The local sheriff's office received multiple calls regarding a hunting accident and rushed to the scene. All the region's emergency medical helicopters were grounded due to inclement weather. Daisy was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance while emergency personnel tried to save her life, but it was unfortunately too late. The family gave the local press their blessing to print Daisy's name in reports of the tragedy. Meanwhile, her father's name remained conspicuously absent from news articles. Authorities announced that an investigation into the incident was ongoing and that their thoughts and prayers went out to the sixth grader's family and friends. The community of Hallsville came together in grief and love following Daisy's death, according to the city's mayor, Jesse Casey. He went on to tell the Longview News Journal that Hallsville is a very unique place. There's a lot of family values and compassion for your fellow man here. A GoFundMe campaign raised over $16,000 to help the family cover funeral expenses. It's probably fair to say that Daisy's father is luckier than some of the other hunters on today's list, who were treated less warmly by the communities after they accidentally shot innocent bystanders. Number 9. Mark Henderson. It's devastating when a hunter accidentally shoots another person, especially when it's fatal. And it's just as tragic when a sportsman unintentionally fires a bullet into himself and takes his own life. That's what happened to 57-year-old Mark Henderson in 2019 while he was hunting in the woods of Franklin County, Maine. Sheriff's deputies were called to the scene by Henderson himself, who said he had accidentally shot himself in the lower part of his left leg while bird hunting in Flagstaff Township. By the time they got there, he was unconscious. Emergency responders administered CPR to the victim while awaiting hospital transport. Henderson held on for around 40 minutes before he succumbed to his injuries. According to game wardens, his death accounted for one of just 3 fatal hunting accidents in Maine that had happened throughout the last decade. There are around 6 non-fatal hunting accidents in the state every year, which, as you'll learn throughout today's video, isn't too bad compared to the number of accidents that some states experience. Number 8. Jimmy Carl Castle. Late last year, investigators in Boone County, West Virginia, announced that a 70-year-old man named Jimmy Carl Castle accidentally shot and killed a man who he thought was a bear. Castle was hunting around 11 in the morning on December 1st near the small community of Twilight when he mistakenly shot 30-year-old David Nicholas Green, who was digging for roots in the area. The hunter immediately knew something wasn't right. Realizing he may have fired a bullet into a human dressed in black rather than a black bear, Castle sought help from a friend nearby. The pair returned to the site, but decided not to search exactly where the so-called bear had been because of the steep terrain. So they concluded that Castle must have shot a garbage bag and called it a day. Green's family reported him missing the next day, and the Boone County Sheriff's Office found the young man's body a little while later. It initially appeared as though he had died from a fall, but a closer examination revealed that Green had been fatally shot. Castle heard about a body being found and decided to do the right thing. He turned himself in and was charged with failure to render aid and negligent shooting involving bodily injury or death. His case is currently working its way through the state's criminal justice system. Do you think the consequences should be less severe because he turned himself in? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to subscribe. Number 7. Retired officer shot in the woods. Gary R. Hunt spent his career upholding the law as a police officer in the city of Corey, Pennsylvania. Ironically, it wasn't until after he retired that he was struck by a bullet. The 64-year-old was hunting for black bears with his nephew in Warren County last November when the two found themselves crossing a creek on foot. Hunt was walking behind his nephew, who slipped or tripped and fell, causing his gun to discharge. Unfortunately, Hunt was in the bullet's direct path. He died from his injuries. Speaking for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, Information and Education Supervisor Jason Armory told GoErie.com that the nephew's gun was being tested for malfunctions, but he believed that the ordeal was simply a horrible accident and didn't expect any charges to be filed against the nephew. Armory further added that Hunt was, by all accounts, remembered as a good man. Two of his former colleagues, Corey Police Corporals Jordan Kitchen and Brett Sproveri, described the police veteran of more than 25 years as community-oriented, compassionate, and well-liked. They also said that he really enjoyed being a police officer. Hunt had retired less than 2 years before the tragic accident. Number 6. Hunter on hunter accidents. 2021 was a bad year when it comes to shooting accidents in western Pennsylvania, where 3 hunters were shot by fellow sportsmen over a 2-week span in late November. 2 of the incidents were fatal. One 58-year-old man named Lawrence Pavolko suffered a life-threatening injury after being shot in the chest by a hunter in Crawford County. Thankfully, he survived and was expected to recover after undergoing emergency surgery. Pavolko was part of a 5-member party that was hunting deer on private property. 3 individuals were driving deer, while 2 shooters remained stationed at fixed locations. The farthest driver spotted a deer and shot. Pavolko followed suit and also fired a bullet at the animal. Then, the middle driver also took a shot, presumably at the same deer, only to hear pained screams moments later. Pavolko was down. His 4 fellow hunters administered first aid while waiting for emergency medical responders. He was airlifted to the hospital, where doctors performed life-saving measures. Sadly, the other 2 hunting accidents that occurred during that 2-week span were both fatal, with one claiming the life of a man in the 70s. The other victim was a 64-year-old retired police officer. Number 5. A fatal family error. While hunting along a gas line in Cambria County, Pennsylvania last year with family and friends, 71-year-old William Tripp was fatally struck by a bullet. A young relative had accidentally shot him in the head while aiming for a deer, bringing the group's Thanksgiving weekend to a tragic end. Tripp was pronounced dead at the scene. Because the shooter is a minor, the press withheld her name and also opted not to disclose the nature of the child's relationship to the victim. The bullet traveled roughly 300 yards before striking Tripp, according to Cambria County Coroner Jeffrey Lees, who spoke with local station WJAC. He described the tragedy as a heart-wrenching, unfortunate accident. Even more sadly, while this type of occurrence is rare, it's not unheard of. Pennsylvania Game Warden Shaw Harshaw told the Tribune Democrat that hunting-related accidents happen every year throughout the state. This means that people can count on history to repeat itself, especially after deer hunting season begins later this year. Number 4. Jordan Griffey. A Clark County, Missouri teen named Jordan Griffey was deer hunting alone near Cahokia last year when he accidentally discharged his firearm and shot himself in the shoulder. The 14-year-old lost a lot of blood and was discovered dead at the scene. The circumstances surrounding Griffey's death are largely a mystery, especially since nobody else was there when it happened. Authorities believe that he tripped and fell, causing his rifle to fire in the process. Anytime a young person loses their life, it's undoubtedly tragic. The community was left reeling from the deadly accident, which brought grieving residents together. A GoFundMe campaign raised over $14,000 to cover the funeral expenses for the high schooler, who was remembered fondly for his infectious smile and as a kind and loving person. The Kansas City Star included a video about the 4 rules of firearm safety in its report of Jordan's death. Hunters are encouraged to keep the gun's muzzle pointed in a safe direction at all times, to treat every firearm as if it's loaded, to be aware of the target and what's in front of and behind it, and to keep one's finger outside of the trigger until they're ready to shoot. Number 3. Hunter shoots hiker. A lot of hunting-related accidents happen later in the year, which is when many states host their annual bear and deer hunting seasons. But some unintentional shootings happen during other times, proving that a person is never truly completely safe from accidental gunfire. One unfortunate hiker in Missouri learned this the hard way last May, when a turkey hunter mistook the individual for a turkey and shot him, leaving him with life-threatening injuries. Due to the remoteness of the location, rescue crews had to use utility terrain vehicles to reach the victim. Once emergency responders reached the scene and realized how serious the injuries were, they summoned a helicopter to airlift the man to the hospital. But it wasn't the hiker's fault this happened. As the St. Charles County Police pointed out in a Facebook post, the shooting occurred along a commonly used hiking trail in the Welland Spring Conservation Area off Highway 94. In other words, there are usually people on the trail. Either way, it's probably fair to say that the hunter had a responsibility to ensure that they weren't putting any people in harm's way when they pulled the trigger, although the police didn't touch on this topic in their post. At the time of reporting, the victim's condition remained unknown as he received treatment at a Level 1 trauma center. Number 2. Mike Hendrickson. Sometimes, a hunter proves to be their own worst enemy by accidentally shooting themselves. That's what happened to Mike Hendrickson, who fired a bullet into his own leg last year while deer hunting in Meager County, Minnesota. Authorities reported to the scene and found that the man had applied a tourniquet to the wound in an attempt to control the bleeding. The 38-year-old's brother-in-law, Matt Pedersen, set up a GoFundMe campaign in an effort to raise funds for medical expenses. He wrote that Mike was climbing into a tree stand when his gun discharged into his left thigh. Luckily, the man's nephew was with him and immediately ran to get help, while Hendrickson wrapped the tourniquet around his leg. He was airlifted to the hospital, where he received emergency surgery. Pedersen wrote that Mike's first operation revealed significant tissue loss, and that the man had broken his femur. He faced a long road to recovery and had already received several surgeries by the time the story hit the press, according to family members. Doctors said Hendrickson might end up losing his leg, but that they were cautiously optimistic about being able to save it. Unfortunately, they had no choice but to amputate part of the leg after failing to find a pulse in Mike's foot. Mike's family described him as the type of person who's quick to drop everything to help someone in need, even a stranger. They started the crowdfunding campaign in hopes that he could focus solely on his recovery without having to worry about money. The fundraiser has gathered nearly $12,000 and is ongoing as Mike continues his healing journey. Number 1. Christian Gilly. Christian Gilly was just a teenager when he became an international shooting champion. Hailing from Italy, he recently took 2 team gold medals in skeet shooting. But not even the pros are immune to human error. The 19-year-old accidentally shot himself in the stomach recently while hunting in his hometown near Pisa. He was bending over to pick up spent cartridges when the gun discharged the fatal bullet. His friends, who were hunting with him at the time, called emergency services. Gilly died at the hospital from his injuries. Italian Shooting Federation President Luciano Rossi led tributes to the talented young sportsman, who he said took several first-place world-ranking medals during the international shooting competition in Peru. These are just some of the many awards Gilly has won, in addition to the individual, team, and mixed team gold medals he took home last May from the European Championship in Osijek, Croatia, according to Rossi. Sadly, the teen's death shows that even the most well-trained hunters and gun users can make fatal mistakes.
Thank you for watching. Would you rather live the lavish life of a real housewife or house husband? Or would you rather be able to say you made your own fortune from scratch and without anyone's help, even if it means working a lot harder to get to the top? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.